Hello and welcome to Mindful Mondays. Recently we had our beautiful 5-year-old granddaughter spend a night at our house, and at one of the meals she offhandedly just issued me a command. It was something like, cut this in smaller pieces. And she wasn't trying to be mean or rotten. She knew what she wanted, and she knew that her grandparents absolutely adore her and kind of tend to, lavish our love and attention on her and help her out in any way that we can see that we can help. And so really all she was doing was just solving a problem, not being a horrible human being. And I did what you might do in my shoes. I just halted the conversation and good-naturedly reminded her that she'd need to pose that as a request, not an order, ask it as a question and maybe use the word please. And I didn't do that as a power play or, because I'm overly proper. We're pretty laid back around our house. I just knew that it's best for her growth and development to approach things less like the princess of the entire planet who has servants all around her, and more like a human being who needs a thing from another human being. So overall, it was a painless interaction, pretty minor course correction, but it reminded me of how we can be with God in our prayer times. Sometimes we are so sure of what we need that we become pretty demanding with God. Our prayers sound more like we're ordering fast food from, some person we don't particularly care for at the register, and less like we're approaching our very own Creator. And sometimes we're so wrapped up in a problem and we're so sure that the answer has to look this one certain way in our heads that we show up like film directors and ready to orchestrate the hand of God, rather than understanding that if anyone is the director on this scene, it's God. And we're more like the actors, or maybe we're more like the guy who brings the coffee and sandwiches in the background. Certainly we're invited to ask God for things. James chapter 2 verses 3 and 4 mention that sometimes we don't have stuff because we didn't ask for it. So we should, we're invited to ask, but perhaps it would be wise to exercise a bit of care in our motivation when we're asking. Like, am I asking because this is what's best for all parties involved, or am I asking because I want my way? And perhaps it would be best to stop and measure my angle of approach in prayer. And by that I mean, am I coming humbly and in a surrendered position before God? Or am I possibly confusing myself for God in the way, that I just think I know it all and I for sure ought to be in control of the situation? Here's a practical way that has worked for me. Twice in my life, I couldn't pray about something at first because I was in no way prepared to accept the answer that was the one I wasn't rooting for or voting for. The first time was when I was finally invited to go and live in an intentional community in Chicago called Jesus People USA. And I had been dreaming of living there and longing for it and kind of planning and hoping for it for so many years. And my kids, I'm sure, had grown tired of hearing about how much I wanted to live there. And so when I got the email actually, inviting me to come, I couldn't even pray about it because the very thought that God might say no and I might need to yield to God's no was devastating to me. So the way I handled that at the time was that I asked some people close to me if they would pray for me, that I would be able to pray with a yielded and surrendered heart. And then I just focused my energy on arriving at the place of surrender. So I didn't pray about going or not going until I could do so with what I call an open hand, which means I would just embrace God's answer, whether it was yes or no. I wouldn't hold on to it with my little clenched fist. I would just ask God and move forward into whatever the answer was. Now, happily for me, the answer was yes, and I got to move there. So the second time that I couldn't pray at first was after I had lived there at Jesus People for a little while, and my former boss emailed me and asked me to pray about moving back from Chicago to the Quad Cities and returning to my old job. And out of respect for him and our relationship, I agreed to pray about it, but then I couldn't. because I just felt like I would die if God said that what he wanted me to do was to leave Jesus People and leave Chicago and return to the Quad Cities. And so I couldn't ask because I couldn't deal with one of the potential answers. So I once again went to people who were close to me and said, please pray for me that I will be able to pray about this with a surrendered heart. And then I again focused my energy into arriving at a place of surrender where I could take a yes, I could take a no, I could follow it either way and do it, embrace it with a glad heart. So it took me again, like it had before, a couple of weeks to get to that place of really focused energy, focused, just trying to get there, the place of surrender. And this time when I finally did pray, I did not get the answer that I wanted and that I was rooting for. The answer was clear, and it was confirmed that I was to leave Chicago, leave Jesus People, and return to my old job. Now, because I had waited and prayed from a place of surrender instead of praying from, I have to have the answer I want, then I was able to have peace and even joy as I moved forward into doing exactly what I did not prefer to do. And I could easily make this video a lot longer, an hour long at least, telling you neat stories about good things that happened as I followed God's call and left the place I wanted to be and returned to a place, that I also loved but was not the place I wanted to be. But for now, I'll just say it all came out really, really well. Jesus People USA still holds an incredibly precious place in my heart and will ever be home really to me in some ways. I kind of miss it and long for it even now, even though I don't live there. And at the same time, this life that I returned to is joyous and purposeful and fulfilling and fun and much more. So that leaves me glad that I didn't dictate orders to God about how this was going to go, either at the beginning when I went to Jesus People or at the end of the journey when I returned. These are zero regrets stories for me, and trust me, I'm the lady who has been able to produce a lot of regrets for myself in a very homegrown way over the years. So as we pray, may you and I find the place of surrender that allows us to just listen to God and follow God rather than trying to issue orders to God. That's all for this time. I will see you next week.